They say some moments haunt you forever. No matter how much time passes, no matter how desperately you try to bury them deep inside, they cling to you like a shadow that refuses to fade with the light. They lurk in the quiet hours of the night, whispering reminders of the exact second you crossed a line you could never uncross. It has been 2 years since that ordinary evening turned into something irreversible. 2 years since my entire world shifted on its axis. And yet, even now, in the stillness of my room, I can still hear his voice echoing in my head. The way he said my name, soft and uncertain. I can still see the way his eyes widened. A mix of confusion, shock, and something deeper flickering in their depths. The air in the room had grown thick and heavy, as if we had accidentally stepped into a forbidden territory where ordinary rules no longer applied. I remember every sensory detail with painful clarity. The warm aroma of the dinner I had prepared lingering in the air, roasted vegetables, garlic bread, and a faint sweetness from the dessert cooling on the counter. The subtle trace of his cologne, fresh and woody, mixing with the distant hum of the television in the living room playing some show that neither of us was truly watching. It was supposed to be just another routine night in our household. Nothing special, nothing dangerous. But life has a cruel way of disguising the pivotal moments as mundane ones until it's too late. People always claim they know exactly what they would do in a situation like mine. They sit in judgment, convinced of their unbreakable morals and ironclad boundaries. I would never, they say with absolute certainty. But the truth is far more terrifying. You never really know your own limits until you're standing right on the edge, feeling that quiet, seductive whisper inside your soul, urging you forward with just one small step. And I took that step. It started so innocently, or at least that's what I told myself in the moment. A simple offer, nothing more. But the instant the words left my lips, I knew. I saw the change in his expression, that brief flicker of hesitation, the widening of his eyes, and beneath it all, a spark of something neither of us dared to name. That was the moment, the one that still keeps me awake at night, staring at the ceiling as the clock ticks mercilessly, replaying every second in excruciating detail. The guilt, the thrill, the confusion, they all tangled together like vines around my heart. And now, after 2 long years of carrying this secret alone, I'm ready to tell the full story. But before I dive in, I need you to pause and ask yourself an honest question. Have you ever felt a moment slip completely out of your control? Have you ever watched yourself do something you knew deep down was wrong, yet found yourself powerless to stop? If you haven't experienced that pull, then let me be the one to warn you. It only takes a single second to cross a line that can never be erased. The consequences don't vanish with time. They embed themselves into your very being. My name doesn't matter here. If you passed me on the street, you wouldn't give me a second glance. I'm just an ordinary woman in her late 30s, blending into the crowd with my practical clothes and tired smile, but the emptiness I carried inside, the quiet desperation of feeling unseen and unloved in my own home, that's something many of you might recognize all too well. I was 38 years old, a wife, a stepmother, and for years, I had shaped myself into the image of the perfect spouse and homemaker. I cooked the meals, kept the house spotless, smiled through the silences, and convinced myself that this was what a good life looked like. But somewhere along the way, I lost pieces of myself. Or perhaps, I had never truly known who I was beneath all those roles I played so diligently. My husband, let's call him David, was everything a provider should be on paper. He worked long hours in a demanding corporate job, ensuring we had a comfortable home in a quiet suburb, food on the table, and financial security. He wasn't cruel or abusive. He simply wasn't present. Not emotionally, not intimately, not in the ways that truly matter when 2 people share a life. At first, I made endless excuses for him. He's exhausted from work. He's carrying the weight of the family on his shoulders. This is all for us. But excuses have a way of wearing thin over time, turning into painful questions that echoed in my mind during the lonely hours. Does he even see me anymore? Does he care about the woman behind the routines? Or am I just another fixture in his orderly existence? Our marriage had started with passion and promise. In the early years, David couldn't keep his hands off me. His eyes would light up when I entered a room, his touches lingering and full of desire. We shared late-night conversations, spontaneous kisses, and a connection that made me feel truly alive. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, That fire had dimmed. Work took precedence, then stress from deadlines, then the comfortable numbness of routine. I tried everything to reignite it. I planned romantic date nights, dressed up in clothes I knew he once loved, initiated intimate moments with hope in my heart. Each attempt was met with polite indifference at best. A quick kiss on the cheek, a distracted "not tonight," "I'm tired," or simply turning away in bed. Eventually, I stopped trying. The pain of rejection after rejection was worse than the loneliness itself. I mourned the death of our intimacy, while lying beside a man who was still legally my husband. And then there was Erick, my stepson. He was 20 years old by the time everything changed. Polite, respectful, and thoughtful in a way that set him apart from most young men his age. I hadn't raised him from childhood. I married David when Erick was already a teenager, mostly independent and keeping to himself. We never developed that deep maternal bond some stepfamilies share. Instead, there was always a quiet distance, a respectful formality. Erick wasn't loud or reckless like many of his peers. He was observant, reserved, with a mystery in his dark eyes that made it impossible to fully guess what he was thinking. He spent his time studying, working part-time, and occasionally helping around the house without being asked. As the years went by, I began to notice subtle shifts in how Erick interacted with me. It wasn't obvious or aggressive at first, just small, almost imperceptible things. His eyes would linger a fraction longer during conversations. He listened with genuine attention when I spoke about my day, something David had stopped doing years ago. He noticed when I was tired or upset, offering quiet help in the kitchen or a simple, "You look nice today," that made my stomach flutter in ways I immediately dismissed as ridiculous. I told myself it was all in my imagination. I was lonely, starved for any scrap of attention, and projecting my unmet needs onto the only other person in the house who actually seemed to see me. But deep down, I knew the loneliness was real and growing like a void inside me. Waking up every morning next to a man who barely glanced my way felt like a slow suffocation. The silence in our bedroom was deafening. No lingering touches, no whispered affections, no sense of being desired or cherished. I had become invisible in my own marriage, a ghost performing the duties of a wife without the warmth that made it meaningful. Erick's presence, by contrast, felt steady and attentive. He asked about my hobbies, remembered small details I mentioned in passing, and filled the empty spaces with quiet companionship that I hadn't realized I craved so desperately. That particular evening started like countless others before it. I had spent the afternoon preparing dinner, grilled chicken with herbs, fresh salad, and a simple chocolate mousse for dessert. The kitchen smelled inviting, a small attempt to create some semblance of family warmth. David arrived home from work later than usual, his tie loosened and his face etched with fatigue. We sat down to eat, but as always his attention was divided. His phone buzzed constantly with work emails and messages. He responded with short grunts or nods, barely looking up from the screen. Erick, seated across from me, made eye contact when he spoke. He complimented the food, asked how my day had gone, and actually waited for my answers. It was such a small thing, but it pierced through the numbness I had grown accustomed to. After dinner, David pushed his chair back almost immediately. "Got some reports to finish," he muttered, grabbing his plate and dropping it in the sink without a second glance. No thank you for the meal, no kiss on the cheek, no acknowledgement of the effort I had put in. The door to his home office clicked shut behind him, leaving Erick and me in the quiet kitchen. I sat there for a moment, staring at his half-empty glass of wine and the untouched side salad. The familiar sting of dismissal crept into my chest, a dull, aching reminder that I was little more than background noise in his life. Erick's voice broke the silence softly. "You okay?" I turned to him, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." He didn't look convinced. His gaze was steady, searching. "You don't have to pretend with me, you know." Something in the gentleness of his tone made my throat tighten unexpectedly. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to me with real concern. I let out a quiet, shaky laugh and shook my head, standing up to clear the table. "Really, it's nothing. Just a long day." Erick stood as well, helping me gather the dishes without being asked. "It's the least I can do," he said, offering a small, warm smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle slightly. We worked side by side at the sink, the clink of plates and running water filling the space. The kitchen felt cozy under the soft overhead light. the rain from earlier that day still pattering lightly against the window. As I reached for a serving spoon to rinse it, our hands brushed accidentally. It was the briefest contact, skin against skin, for less than a second, but it sent an unexpected shiver racing up my arm and straight through my body. I pulled back too quickly, my breath catching in my throat. Heat flushed my cheeks, and I busied myself with the faucet, hoping he hadn't noticed. But Erick didn't move away immediately. His eyes flickered up to meet mine, holding the gaze a moment longer than necessary. There was a question in them, or perhaps recognition of the same strange charge. I felt humming in the air between us. "Sorry," I mumbled, drying my hands on a dish towel a little too vigorously. "Clumsy tonight." "It's okay," he replied, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. The words hung there, simple yet weighted with something unspoken. I turned back to the sink, my mind racing. Why had that innocent touch affected me so much? It was nothing, just two people in a kitchen. But my pulse was still elevated, and the room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, more intimate than it had any right to be. I don't know what possessed me in that exact instant. Maybe it was the accumulated loneliness bubbling up, or the way his presence made me feel seen after years of invisibility. Maybe I was just trying to diffuse the sudden tension with something lighthearted. Whatever the reason, the words slipped out before I could stop them. "Do you want to taste it?" I held up the spoon from the dessert bowl, still coated with a bit of the rich chocolate mousse I had made earlier. It was meant to be completely innocent, an offer to share the leftover sweetness, a casual gesture between stepmother and stepson. But the moment the sentence left my mouth, I realized how it could sound, how it might be interpreted in the charged atmosphere we had unknowingly created. Erick froze for a split second. His lips parted slightly, and his expression shifted from casual to something unreadable, confusion, mixed with a flicker of surprise. He wasn't looking at the spoon anymore. His eyes were locked on mine, dark and intense, searching for something I wasn't sure I wanted him to find. The air grew heavier, the distant television sounds fading into nothingness. My heart hammered against my ribs as I held the spoon steady, suddenly hyper-aware of how close we were standing, of the faint scent of his cologne, of the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. Slowly, almost as if testing the waters, he leaned in. His fingers brushed against mine as he took the spoon, the contact sending another unwelcome jolt through me. He brought it to his lips, tasting the mousse deliberately. His tongue flicked out to catch a stray bit on his lower lip, and his gaze never left my face. "It's good," he murmured, his voice low and rougher than usual. "Really good." I nodded, my throat suddenly dry and tight. "I'm glad you like it." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Something thick and undeniable lingered in the space between us, an invisible thread pulling taut, threatening to snap. I could feel the heat rising in my body, a dangerous awareness I hadn't experienced in years. Erick's eyes darkened slightly, and I wondered if he felt it too, this forbidden undercurrent that had no place in our family dynamic. He was my husband's son. I was supposed to be a maternal figure, not whatever this confusing pull was turning me into. He handed the spoon back, our fingers touching once more. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. The contact lingered just a heartbeat longer than it should have. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Thanks for dinner," he said, his tone attempting casual but falling slightly short. "I should get back to studying." "Yeah," I whispered, turning away to hide the flush I knew was creeping up my neck. "Good night, Erick." He left the kitchen, and I stood there alone, gripping the edge of the counter as my knees felt unexpectedly weak. The spoon was still in my hand, now slightly warm from his touch. What had just happened? It was nothing, I told myself firmly. Just a shared dessert. A moment of awkwardness caused by my own loneliness playing tricks on me. Erick was being polite, as always. I was overthinking it because David had made me feel so starved for connection. But as I finished cleaning up and turned off the lights, the house settling into its usual evening quiet, I couldn't shake the image of his eyes on mine, the way he had tasted the dessert while watching me, the subtle shift in the air that made the ordinary feel electric. That night, sleep evaded me completely. I lay in bed beside David, who had already fallen asleep with his back turned to me, his breathing deep and even, oblivious to everything. The sheets felt too warm, the room too confining. My mind replayed the kitchen scene on an endless loop. The brush of hands, the offer, the way Erick had leaned in, the intensity in his gaze. Was it just my imagination? amplified by years of neglect? Or had there been a real spark, something mutual and dangerous? I turned onto my side, pressing my face into the pillow to muffle any sound. "This is ridiculous," I scolded myself silently. "He's your stepson, 20 years old. You're a married woman. Nothing happened. Nothing will happen." But my body betrayed my thoughts. A low heat simmered in my core, unbidden and unwelcome. Memories of earlier years with David flooded back, how his touches once ignited me, how I had felt desired and alive. Now that same longing was stirring because of a simple kitchen interaction with Erick. Guilt twisted, sharply in my stomach, but it didn't extinguish the feeling. I thought about how different Erick was from his father. Where David had become distant and preoccupied, Erick was present. He noticed me. He listened. He made me feel like I existed beyond the roles of cook and housekeeper. When was the last time David had asked if I was okay with genuine concern? When was the last time anyone had looked at me the way Erick had tonight? I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the thoughts away. This wasn't about Erick, it was about me, about the emptiness that had been growing for so long. Loneliness was a dangerous companion. It made you vulnerable, made you see connections where there were none. I had to be careful. I had to draw clear boundaries before my mind wandered any further into forbidden territory. But even as I tried to convince myself, a small, treacherous part of me wondered, what if it wasn't all in my head? What if that moment had meant something to him too? The next few days blurred together in a haze of routine and inner turmoil. I went through the motions, preparing breakfast, doing laundry, smiling at David when he briefly emerged from his work cave. He never noticed the slight distraction in my eyes or the way I lingered in the kitchen, longer than necessary, half hoping, half dreading another encounter with Erick. Erick, for his part, seemed normal, or at least he tried to act that way. He joined meals when he could, helped with chores, and exchanged polite conversation. But I caught the subtle differences. His glances were quicker, almost guarded. When our paths crossed in the hallway or near the fridge, he stepped aside a little faster. The easy camaraderie we had shared before that night felt strained, replaced by an undercurrent of awareness. One afternoon, while I was folding clothes in the living room, he walked in and sat on the opposite couch, scrolling through his phone. The silence stretched, comfortable on the surface but loaded underneath. Suddenly he looked up. "Are you happy?" he asked without preamble. I blinked, caught off guard. "What? With Dad, are you happy here?" The question landed like a stone in still water, rippling through my carefully constructed defenses. I laughed dryly, setting the shirt I was folding aside. "That's complicated, Erick." He tilted his head, watching me with that thoughtful intensity. "It shouldn't be complicated if it's real." I sighed, meeting his gaze despite the warning bells in my head. Happiness isn't always straightforward. Sometimes you don't realize how much you've lost until you're living in the middle of the absence. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing my words. "So you're not?" "I don't know anymore," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. It was the most honest I'd been with anyone in years. That conversation lingered with me long after he left the room. Something had shifted again, not dramatically, but enough to make the air feel different whenever we were alone. I found myself replaying his question, analyzing every nuance in his tone. Was he concerned as a stepson, or was there more? And why did his concern feel like a lifeline I desperately wanted to grab? Nights became the hardest. Lying awake while David slept soundly, I battled the growing thoughts. The guilt was there, sharp and persistent, reminding me of my vows and my role. But alongside it came a forbidden curiosity, a spark of life I hadn't felt in so long. Being noticed, being truly seen, it was intoxicating after years of emotional drought. I told myself repeatedly that I was overreacting, that nothing had happened and nothing would. I was a good wife, a responsible adult. Erick was family. But the more I repeated those truths, the more they felt like fragile barriers against an incoming tide. Little did I know that the real test was still coming. The rainy evening when the house felt smaller, more intimate, and the words, "Do you want to taste it?" would be spoken again, this time with far less innocence and far more consequence. The rainy evening arrived like a quiet conspirator, wrapping the house in a cocoon of soft gray light and the constant, rhythmic drumming of raindrops against the windows. It made everything feel smaller, more intimate, as if the outside world had retreated and left only the 3 of us, though in reality, it was just Erick and me once again. David had texted earlier that he would be working late. Another emergency project that couldn't wait. I had stopped feeling the sharp sting of disappointment long ago. Now it was just a dull acceptance. I prepared dinner as usual, simple pasta with homemade sauce, garlic bread, and a fresh salad. The kitchen filled with warm aromas that should have felt comforting, but instead only highlighted the emptiness of the third chair at the table. Erick and I ate in relative silence at first, the clink of forks against plates mixing with the rain. He complimented the food like always, his voice steady and polite. But there was a new carefulness in the way he spoke, as if he were measuring every word. I watched him across the table, noting the way his dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, the subtle tension in his shoulders. The memory of that kitchen moment with the chocolate mousse still hung between us like invisible smoke, neither acknowledged nor forgotten. We had both been pretending it never happened, but the pretense was growing thinner with each passing day. After dinner, I moved to the counter to make tea, my evening ritual. The kettle whistled softly as I poured steaming water over the tea bags, adding a spoonful of honey to each mug the way I liked it. Erick lingered instead of retreating to his room. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely over his chest, watching me with that quiet, observant gaze that always made me feel exposed. The rain intensified outside, thunder rumbling faintly in the distance, adding to the charged atmosphere inside. "You make this every night," he observed. His tone casual, but his eyes anything but. I smiled faintly, stirring the honey until it dissolved. "It helps me unwind, or at least I tell myself it does." "Does it actually work?" he asked, accepting the mug I handed him. Our fingers brushed again. Deliberately this time? I wasn't sure anymore. The contact sent that familiar, unwelcome spark through me, but I kept my expression neutral. "Not really," I admitted with a soft chuckle. "But it's become a habit." We stood there sipping in silence for a while, the steam rising between us. The kitchen light cast a warm glow on his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the slight stubble that had appeared since he started shaving more regularly. He looked older than 20 in that moment, more mature, more present. I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. A tired stepmother going through the motions or something else. Then he spoke again, his voice lower, almost hesitant. "Do you ever wonder what it would feel like to just leave, walk away from everything and start over?" The question caught me off guard. I turned to face him fully, my mug warming my hands. "Leave? Like leave the marriage?" He shrugged, but his eyes held mine steadily. "From everything that's making you unhappy. Just start fresh somewhere new." I studied him carefully, noting the way his fingers drummed lightly against the side of the mug. This wasn't casual conversation anymore. That sounds like something someone says when they're not happy, where they are either. A pause. The rain seemed louder now, filling the spaces where words failed. Erick exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Maybe I'm not." The admission hung heavy in the air. I felt my pulse quicken. We were venturing into dangerous territory, talking about unhappiness, about escape, about things that should remain buried. I lifted my mug, blew gently across the hot surface to cool it, then met his gaze again. "Do you want to taste it?" The words slipped out almost exactly as they had that first night, but this time they carried double meaning. I wasn't just offering tea, I knew it, and from the way his expression shifted, confusion, flickering briefly before something darker, more intense settled in, I knew he understood too. Erick's grip tightened on the mug. He looked away for a second, swallowing hard. "That's probably not a good idea," he said, his voice rough and low. "Why not?" I asked, taking a small step closer without thinking, close enough to smell the faint scent of his body wash-mixed with the rain damp, air clinging to his clothes, close enough to see the rapid rise and fall of his chest. He met my eyes again, and this time there was no mistaking the conflict there. Desire warring with guilt, hesitation with longing. "You know why?" I did know. Of course I did. He was my stepson. I was married to his father. This was wrong on every level society could name. But in that rain-soaked kitchen, with the house empty, except for us and the loneliness that had been my constant companion for years, the wrongness felt distant, almost irrelevant compared to the way my body was responding to his nearness. My skin tingled, my breath came shallower. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt alive, seen, wanted, on the edge of something electric. I took another step. The space between us shrank until I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Erick! I whispered his name, not as a warning, but as a question. He set his mug down on the counter with a soft clink, his hand trembling slightly. We can't, he said, but he didn't move away. Instead, his eyes dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back up. The tension snapped. I don't remember who moved first. Maybe it was me leaning in that final inch. Maybe it was him, his hand coming up to cup the side of my face with surprising gentleness. Our lips met, hesitant at first, testing, then deepening as years of suppressed longing and loneliness poured out. The kiss was soft and desperate all at once, tasting of tea and honey and forbidden fruit. His other hand found my waist, pulling me closer, and I melted into him, my fingers gripping the front of his shirt as if letting go would make the moment vanish. For those few stolen seconds, nothing else existed. No David, no roles, no consequences. Just the heat of his mouth, the solid strength of his body against mine. The way he kissed me like he had been thinking about it as long as I had. A soft sound escaped my throat, half moan, half sigh, and he responded by pressing me back against the counter, the edge digging into my lower back. Then reality crashed in. Erick pulled back suddenly, breathing hard, his eyes wide with shock and regret. Shit! We can't do this, he whispered, running a hand through his hair. He's my dad. This is messed up. I stood there, lips still tingling, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Guilt flooded me instantly, hot and nauseating. But it was mixed with something else, disappointment that it had ended, and a deep, aching want for more. I know, I managed, my voice shaky. I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. He stepped back further, creating distance, but his eyes still held mine with that same intensity. It's not just you. I felt it too. That's the problem. The confession hung between us, raw and honest. We stared at each other for a long moment, the rain continuing its relentless rhythm outside, as if mocking our attempt to pretend normalcy. Erick muttered something about needing air and disappeared into his room, the door clicking shut with finality. I remained in the kitchen, gripping the counter for support, my legs unsteady. My reflection in the dark window showed a woman I barely recognized. Flushed cheeks, parted lips, eyes bright with a dangerous mix of guilt and desire. That night, sleep was impossible. David came home late, slipped into bed without a word, and turned his back to me as usual. I lay there in the darkness, replaying the kiss on an endless loop. The softness of Erick's lips, the way his hand had cradled my face, the solid press of his body. Guilt clawed at me relentlessly. What kind of wife was I? What kind of mother figure? I had crossed the ultimate line, not just in thought, but in action. And worse, I had enjoyed it. A part of me, buried deep under layers of responsibility and self-denial, had come alive in those few seconds. The following days were torture wrapped in normalcy. Erick avoided me more deliberately now. He left early for classes or work, came home late, and when we did cross paths, conversations were short, clipped, and painfully polite. He wouldn't meet my eyes for more than a second. At dinner with David present, the tension was invisible to my husband, but suffocating for us. I caught Erick glancing at me when he thought no one was looking. Quick, conflicted looks that mirrored my own inner turmoil. I tried to fix it. I threw myself into household chores, planned a weekend outing with David, which he canceled last minute for work, and even attempted to reconnect with old friends. But nothing filled the void. At night, alone with my thoughts, the guilt mixed with longing. I missed the way Erick used to look at me before the kiss, with quiet admiration and attention. Now he looked at me like I was a mistake he couldn't undo. And somehow, that hurt more than David's indifference ever had. One late night, when the house was silent and David was away on an overnight business trip, I finally broke. I sat on the cold floor of my bedroom, knees pulled to my chest, silent tears streaming down my face. The mirror across the room reflected a woman unraveling. Hollow eyes, trembling hands. What have I done? I whispered to the empty room. I had always seen myself as strong, as the one who held everything together. Now I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. The real betrayal hadn't been the kiss itself. It had started long before, in the quiet moments when I allowed loneliness to rewrite my boundaries, when I let myself crave the attention of the wrong person. Yet even in the depth of self-loathing, I couldn't completely regret the feeling of being wanted. For those brief moments, I had felt desired, alive, seen in a way David hadn't made me feel in years. That truth terrified me more than anything. Erick must have heard me moving around because his door opened softly down the hall. I wiped my tears quickly as he appeared in the doorway, wearing only sweatpants, his hair tousled from sleep. He hesitated, clearly torn between retreating and coming closer. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, echoing the words from that first night. I shook my head, unable to lie anymore. "No, I'm not." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, but staying near the entrance. Maintaining distance. About what happened. I can't stop thinking about it either. The admission cracked something open inside me. We talked then, really talked, for the first time, about the loneliness in this house, about how David had emotionally checked out years ago, about how Erick had noticed my quiet suffering, and found himself drawn to me in ways he knew were wrong. He admitted the pull had started subtly for him too, the way I listened, the way I tried to make the house feel like a home, the quiet strength I showed even when I was breaking. But we both knew it couldn't continue. "This has to stop," he said finally, his voice heavy with regret. "Before it destroys everything." I nodded, tears fresh in my eyes. "I know." He left shortly after, and I remained on the floor until dawn, exhausted and emotionally spent. In the weeks that followed, we both tried desperately to rebuild the walls. Erick spent more time outside the house, focusing on his studies and friends. I threw myself into volunteering and self-improvement, attempting to rediscover who I was beyond being David's wife or Erick's stepmother. David remained oblivious, buried in his work, never suspecting the silent earthquake that had shaken our home. But some lines once crossed leave permanent marks. The guilt never fully left me. Nights still brought flashbacks of that kiss, the taste of forbidden desire, the way my body had responded with a hunger I hadn't known I possessed. I questioned everything about myself, my morals, my marriage, my capacity for self-control. Loneliness, I learned, doesn't just make you weak. It reveals parts of you that were always there, waiting for the right or wrong trigger. 2 years have passed since that rainy night. David and I are still married on paper, though the emotional distance has only grown. Erick moved out 6 months after the incident, citing the need for independence near his university. We exchange polite texts on holidays and birthdays, but the easy familiarity is gone, replaced by careful boundaries and unspoken history. I still carry the weight of that moment. It haunts me in quiet evenings when the rain falls, in the scent of tea with honey. In the rare times I catch myself wondering, what if? I've learned that some mistakes don't announce themselves with fanfare. They slip in softly, disguised as connection, as being seen, as relief from unbearable emptiness. And once they take root, they change you forever. If you're reading this and feeling unseen in your own life, hear my warning. Loneliness can push you toward edges you never thought you'd approach. It can make the forbidden seem tempting, the wrong feel momentarily right. But the cost, the guilt, the self-doubt, the irreversible shift in how you see yourself is far heavier than the brief comfort it offers. Have you ever stood at that edge? Would you have pulled back sooner or given in to the pull? What would you have done in that kitchen on that rainy night? I still don't have all the answers, but I know this. Some moments truly do haunt you forever, and no amount of time can fully erase the shadow they cast.